Thanks for taking the time to download this BBC Radio 5 Live podcast. To search for other podcasts you might like, click bbc.co.uk/5live, where you'll also find our terms of use.
When it comes to cycling, it's what separates the men from the boys and the great riders from the greatest.
There's definitely a bit more tension on the start line of a mountainous stage.
It's the defending champion, 100 metres with one of his most beautiful wins in his career.
Chances are you're probably going to be crawling back to that team bus after the stage. You've gone so hard.
Vincenzo Nibali is over 4 minutes behind on the road. Alberto Contador is 2 3/4 minutes behind on the road. TJ Van Garderen is over 2 minutes back. All of the overall riders are losing time, hand over fist here to Chris Froome.
Doesn't hurt me. You wanna feel how it feels.
It is a bit of a poker game out there.
This Tour de France already is beginning to look like a battle between Froome and Nairo Quintana.
It's just this constant game of how you can play on each other's insecurities.
Chris Froome attacking Nairo Quintana.
When you get into those really high mountains, if you haven't done the work, it's going to show.
Oh, and Froome has attacked now, and Froome has attacked and left Port behind. Port's done his job.
There's nowhere to hide. You can't sit in a bunch. You can't rely on your teammates to protect you and shield you at that point.
Froome is going for it with 6k to go. That's a long, long way to go.
Those scenes up on Mont Ventoux last year were very rare.
Oh, Chris Froome's off his bike. Chris Froome is off his bike, running up Mont Ventoux.
I have never, ever seen anything like this in my life.
Don't often run into those kind of situations, thankfully.
And the man at the front, who's just a few hundred metres away from us, he's going to finish shortly. It's the man in the yellow jersey. It's Chris Froome, who is giving everybody an absolute pasting here on this climb.
It's a great feeling when you can inflict that to someone else.
Froome crosses the line now. What a stage win. He's won in the grand manner, the yellow jersey. First to reach the summit finish here, high in the Pyrenees.
It's man against man, and if you haven't got it, you haven't got it.
What a way to set it up. This is Chris Froome, the secret world of climbing, and over the next 90 minutes you'll be hearing from the defending three-time Tour de France winner, the skinniest but quite possibly the toughest man in Lycra. So what makes him so resilient and quite often devastating in the mountains? He'll be revealing all over the next hour and a half. And BBC Sports' Tom Fordyce interviewed Chris for the programme. Tom, what were you trying to get out of him?
Well, OJ, I think we've all loved watching those great epic mountain stages in the Tour de France over the years. And I wanted to get a sense of what it's like in the heart of it. We will never sit on Chris Froome's wheel. I wanted to know what he's going through when your heart rate's maxing out, when there's lactic acid pumping through your legs, when you feel like you've got nothing else to give and you've got to keep going.
He can be quite guarded at times, especially when I've interviewed him in the past. How did you find him?
I found him, first of all, very polite. He's a very well-brought-up boy. He was in reflective mood. He looked very lean. We saw him, would it have been 10 days before the start of the Tour? So he's looking very skinny at this stage. But I felt he was in very reflective mood, and he was very insightful. I felt like he did take us inside the heart of a mountain stage.
Now, also with me in the studio, a man who much prefers testing himself against the clock, also owns a second-hand altitude tent. It's former time trial specialist turned author and journalist, Dr. Michael Hutchinson. And Michael, what makes Chris Froome such a superb climber, do you think?
He's built for climbing. He's the right shape. He's got the right physiology. And once you've got that, on top of that, then he brings the attitude because he's very, very considered. And in any race situation, it's very, very easy to get overexcited and panic. And I think Chris has the ability to always calculate what's the smart thing to do, what do I do now, what is everybody else thinking? And that's a very, very effective combination.
Is he naturally just a great climber, or is it something, do you think, that he's had to work on over the years?
Well, it's both. I mean, he's the right shape. He's a skinny, light-built guy, and when you're riding up a hill, weight is critical. So he has that to begin with. But he's worked at it because if you look back to 2007, 2008, he was an all-right climber, but he wasn't anything like he is now. That's come from somewhere, and it's come from years of consistently working at it, consistently improving.
Do you think it's something you can actually work at and get better? I mean, some of us in this room right now maybe are built like rugby league forwards. Are you just a good climber? Is it inherently in your genes and then you can work at it to become one of the all-time greats? Or can you learn it? Can anyone learn it?
It's probably about a 50-50. You know, anyone can get better at climbing. Anyone can lose a little bit of weight. Anyone can get a little bit more power. Anyone can just practice it. But to get from, an average, ordinary bike rider to the kind of thing that Chris Froome can do in the high mountains, that's an impossible trip. You have to start at least some of the way there already.
Well, let's hear from the man we're talking about, because this year Froome will face shorter, steeper and harder climbs in what could be the toughest challenge yet to his Tour de France supremacy. So what is it really like when the peloton hits the mountains?
There's definitely a bit more tension on the start line of a mountainous stage when you know this is going to be a day that's going to shape general classification of a stage race. You know that this is going to be a day that chances are you're probably going to be crawling back to that team bus after the stage. You've gone so hard.
Do you feel a little bit scared at that point? Do you feel excited?
I think it depends. It depends how you've prepared for it. So I mean, if you know you're ready and you know basically you're just waiting for the climbs to come so you can show what you can do, then it's more excitement. You just can't wait to get to the climb, get to the foot of the climb in one piece and at the front of the race without any mishaps beforehand, any bad luck or punctures or crashes or anything like that. You just can't wait for that moment when the climb actually starts. But if you're on the other side where you're not quite feeling confident and you know other guys are climbing faster than you, then there's definitely a bit more angst. You're a bit nervous about who's going to lay it down today and are you going to be able to hang on?
You'll have recce'd the big climbs in advance. How well do you know them? Have you worked out where the best place to attack might be?
Yeah, so I mean, we generally for races like the Tour de France, we'll get out there and go and have a look at the really selective climbs of the race and the really real sort of key moments. But apart from that, I mean, even on the morning of the race, on the bus before the start, we'll be going through each climb and especially the final climbs. If it's a summit finish, you'll be going through kilometre by kilometre what the percentages are and where the steep ramps are that potentially would be the key points to make or break the race.
So Mark Cavendish will use Google Street View or something like that, and he'll be able to tell you exactly what that last 10k of a bunch sprint is like. Is your memory as good as his when it comes to that?
My memory isn't that great, so I do have to be reminded, even once we're out on the road, after we've seen the stage in the morning on Google Maps and Google Street View and everything. But Nicolas Portal, our race director in the car behind us, is really good at that. So even coming into the last few Ks of a tricky final, he'll be saying, okay, next up you've got the left turn that doubles back on itself, and then with the traffic island in the middle, so you make sure it's a tight one, you make sure you take the line properly. And so he's really good at giving us those little heads up and the little reminders. But I mean, once we get onto the climbs in the mountains for those last few kilometers, it's more about the legs than actually remembering what corner goes where, and it's more about how the legs are feeling, how the body's feeling, and your ability to push at that point.
Christine Orugu, the former 400-metre Olympic champion, told me once that when racers go to the start line for 400 metres, it's almost as if they're going to the gallows. There's so much fear of the pain that's to come. No one's talking, no one's laughing, no one's joking. As you approach the definitive climb, is there the same sort of atmosphere in the peloton?
A lot of the time it feels as if the same kind of feeling as if we're building up for a bunch sprint coming into the bottom of a climb. Sometimes it feels as if we've got our lead out trains, but instead of an incredibly powerful sprinter on the back, you've got a skinny climber who's basically just ready to go for it. And once you hit the climb, and I mean, that jostling for position can be equated to a bunch sprint. I mean, it's full gas, and even though everyone looks as if they're on their line and on their train, you know that if you back off the wheel just a few feet, that's enough for someone else to move in and take your position. So everyone's pretty much on the limit at that point. You're going as hard as you can into the bottom of the climb, and you always want to start the climbs at the front, so that you're not having to try and make up positions, or if one of your rivals attacks at the bottom, you can respond to it. You're not 50 wheels back and trying to pass guys who have finished their lead out and getting out of the way.
Is there shouting and swearing as you're fighting for position and elbows going out?
I mean, it can get pretty heated, yeah, sure. You get people who are up there for no apparent reason and want to ride halfway through your train, and you've got to fight them off. You've got to get them out of there, because those guys are the guys who will take you back with them. So,
does that fall to you? Or does that fall to your road captain?
I mean, it depends who's there. I mean, the road captain might be on the front, and this might be happening 10th wheel, sort of towards the back of your line. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to get involved yourself if you want to start the climb at the front. Otherwise, you're just going to get taken out the back with someone else.
And you'll shout at them in what, French? Or it's because you're good at languages, French or Italian, or just a good old-fashioned English?
Yeah, it depends. Depends who they are. I mean, if it's in Italian, you'd ask him. Whatever in Italian, I better not repeat it. But if it's a French guy, same. I mean, you learn to speak, I guess, a universal language in the peloton, and everyone understands all the swear words. So it doesn't matter what language you're speaking.
So you have to gauge your effort carefully on those big climbs. I'm going to read you a little quote from Chris Boardman, and he was talking about the individual pursuit, but I think it might have some relevance to climbing as well. He said, "There's an equation that goes through your head. How hard am I trying? How far is there to go? And can I keep this up? If the answer to the last part is yes, you're not going fast enough. If the answer is no, it's too late. You've already blown too much. The answer you want is maybe. Maybe I can keep this up." Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that's a beautiful quote. And yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I mean, there's a lot of time where you're on the climb and you're going so hard that you think to yourself, I really can't sustain this for much longer. But you look around you and you see other people dropping, and that just gives you even more fuel just to carry on at that same pace and wait until it's even more reduced before you start letting up the pace a bit.
Do you ride to a rhythm in your head or even a song in your head, or are you just watching your computer on your bike?
No. I mean, it's a lot of the time. Most of the time for me, I'm riding on feeling, how the legs are feeling. I mean, if the legs are feeling as if I can push more, I'll push more, regardless of what the computer says. I think it's always good to keep an eye on the computer. It gives you a gauge of just, okay, I'm feeling good. The power says 400 watts. That's a good sign. Or if I'm feeling terrible, but the power shows 480 watts, then that would probably explain it, and you can justify it in your head and say, okay, well, I should be feeling terrible at this kind of intensity. So it's the computer's there as a gauge, but I think at the end of the day, on a climb, you have to be going off feeling and off what's happening in the race around you. I mean, there's no use Richie Porter, one of my rivals, riding off up the road, and I'm sitting there trying to stay on a certain number of wattage or power. I'm just going to fall behind. So you have to be able to react to what's going on in the race.
Fascinating stuff from Chris Froome there, including Tom Fordyce. The fact you almost got the politest man in cycling to swear on record. He was very close to it, even in Italian there.
Yeah, he was, wasn't he? But he's too polite for that, OJ.
Far too polite. The other thing was listening to the palpable excitement he talks about when he gets to the bottom of a climb. There can't be many cyclists in the peloton who'd be excited to get to the bottom of a climb.
Well, there's abject terror for some, aren't they? Not least the sprinters. Geraint Thomas tells me of mountain stages where he'll look down the road and he'll just see a line of sprinters almost blocking the road. And you're thinking, what are these sprinters doing there before a big climb? And they're just trying to delay the inevitable pain. They're almost like a human dam, and it will the dam will bulge and bend a little as some teams try to get through. Eventually it will crack. As soon as one sprinter moves out the way, bang, the climbers are through, the climbers' teams are through, the race radio lights up, and away they go.
And I thought it was interesting as well, Michael, him talking about the annoyance of having non-climbers there at the foot of a climb, because we always hear about sprinters moaning about normal riders getting in the way of the lead-out trains at the sharp end, the pointy end, the finish of a stage. But I've never heard a climber talking about the annoyance of having non-climbers there.
Yeah, everybody wants to be at the front all the time. You always want to be at the front of the bike race because it is safer. And for a climb, if you're a non-climber, well, if you begin at the very front of the bunch might last sort of 20 or 30 seconds. So particularly if it's not a very long climb, that gives you an extra 20 or 30 seconds to get up the climb and still be in touch with the back of the race. And maybe these are margins. It's not, if you're going to ride up Mont Ventoux, maybe that doesn't seem so important. But that 20 or 30 seconds, that might really matter.
And where do you think this excitement about climbing hills comes from for Chris Froome? Is it knowing that that's where he might win a race? Is it knowing that's where he might drop his rivals, or just the testing himself?
I think it's a combination of those two, OJ. It's what you do your training for. He knows he's very, very good at it, so there's that palpable excitement that he's going to demonstrate what he can do, and it's his chance, fundamentally, to put time into his GC rivals. It's usually where a race is won or lost.
Now, preparation is a word that many cyclists use, usually followed by the letter H. Froome uses it a lot himself. Does that mean spending hours simply going up and down major climbs? Is that his preparation?
There'll be a lot of climbing, there'll be a lot of looking at his weight, a lot of trying to tailor his training to produce the physiology that he needs. So all of his climbing might not be riding up and down hills. There'll be some riding on turbo trainers. There'll be bits of interval training. I mean, it's a whole package designed to produce the best climber that Chris Froome can be. So it'll look at power, it'll look at weight, it'll look at... I mean, one of the issues on the climb, one of the reasons it's different from something like a time trial, is that the inertial loading is different. If you're riding up a hill, the whole thing feels heavier. You know, there's not the same momentum behind you. So that will mean, he'll do some training up very steep hills and some training up long drags and more training on turbo, all of this stuff just to try and tune that sort of feeling into his muscles.
How tuned do you think he felt when you were chatting to him? Because we're not far off from the start of the Tour de France.
Well, he's raced quite lightly this year, OJ. He doesn't have a win going into the Tour. I think he's only done 19 days of racing this year. He had just come back from wrecking some of those big climbs. And he will always go into the Tour having spent some time in Tenerife on Mount Tidy, which is where Sky and several other teams now base themselves. And there's a climb there that Tim Kerrison, who's Team Sky's head of performance, found. And it's called Churchy. And it's not that long. I think it's only about 4K, slightly under 4K. But it's nasty. It's got ramps of 20, 25%. It doesn't really go anywhere. It's not a road that you drive up in the car. But the Sky boys will test themselves on that, and they'll push themselves on that, and they'll do repeated efforts. And when you're staying on Mount Tidy, they all stay in a hotel at the top. Nothing to do there, nothing to watch on TV. There might be 2 or 3 rival teams in there as well. Froome could find himself rooming next to Contador, for example. But it's what you do on the roads outside that mean when you get to the Tour a couple of months later, you go onto those climbs not only with the strength in your legs, but with the confidence in your head as well.
But surely he would have had more confidence if he'd actually won a race heading into this point. You can do all the training miles around. Or is Chris Froome so bulletproof mentally that he doesn't need that?
I think Chris Froome is one of those guys who will be able to look at the numbers and take confidence from the numbers. He can look at his training for the last 2 or 3 years running into successful runs at the Tour de France and say, yeah, I'm hitting the numbers. Now, the reason he doesn't want to race this season might be because he's not hitting the numbers. And if that's the case, that will worry him. But it's not the actual winning or the losing of the races for him. I think it's going to be those numbers and those spreadsheets. That is something he can really connect with.
So you are listening to Chris Froome, The Secret World of Climbing. Now, the Tour de France is unlike any other sporting event in terms of how close you can get to the action. And climbs such as Alpe d'Huez and Mont Ventoux attract thousands upon thousands of fans. And sometimes you can get a little too crazy.
Oh, Chris Froome's off his bike. Chris Froome is off his bike running up Mont Ventoux. This is an unprecedented situation. He is running up the hill on his bike. Richie Port goes with him. We do not know what's happened, but we saw a very grainy image of spectators in the way of riders on Mont Ventoux.
Let's talk about the crowds, the extraordinary crowds that you get on a mountain stage. They always seem to part like the Red Sea just as you approach. Is there ever a fear in your head they're not going to move?
Except for on Mont Ventoux.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they do amazingly open up normally at the last second. I mean, yeah, those scenes up on Mont Ventoux last year were very, very rare, and we don't often run into those kind of situations, thankfully.
Does it get scary sometimes?
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, you're riding at sometimes speeds 50, 60, 70 kilometers an hour, and there is only just space for a couple guys to get through sometimes. And there are a lot of people who see a TV camera and they want to turn to it and wave to it, and they don't realize how quickly we're coming behind. And you see a lot of spectators get hit every year.
What can you hear from the crowd? Can you hear individual chants, individual cheers, or insults sometimes?
I think it depends at what stage of the race it is, and just how thick that crowd is. I mean, if it's going up Alpe d'Huez and it's just literally 10 people deep, or on the Champs-Élysées, it's just a blur of sounds. You can't really make out anything. But if the break's just gone and the pace is a bit lower and it's a couple guys standing on the climb, you can see what they're talking about, or you can hear exactly what they're saying. So I think it depends also what stage the race is at. If it's absolutely full on, almost an explosion could go off right next to you and you probably wouldn't even realize you're just so in the moment, in the race mode. And quite often, I mean, there's people lighting fireworks around us, there's people lighting flares right next to us, and you just block it all out, and just you're thinking about everything that's actually happening on the bike and the race itself when the race is really on like that.
Can you smell the beer on the breath? Can you smell the barbecues?
You certainly can, especially up on the climbs after sort of, once it gets later in the afternoon, 3, 4, 5 o'clock, you get really close to people who are shouting, just encouraging most of the guys, and you can smell the alcohol on a lot of people. It's heavy. It's a heavy smell.
It's a very intense experience, I imagine. Does it fire you up? Does it get you more adrenalised?
It does. I think. It definitely. Having support on the roads is an amazing feeling. There's nothing better than when you're going up the climb and you are hurting. You're just struggling to hold on to pace, but you have someone just come up to you for a second and just say, "Come on, son, dig in," and it's just like, oh, bloody hell, he's right. I just need to get through this little bit.
So if someone's on a mountain in the Tour this year and they want to cheer you on, what are the no-nos and what are the things that work? So, for example, if someone throws a freezing cold glass of water over your back, is that good or bad?
Oh, I wouldn't complain. Certainly not in those temperatures at the Tour. That's all good.
Running alongside you?
Yeah, well, running alongside me gets me nervous. I've had a couple of bad experiences there already, and it makes me nervous. People running right next to your handlebars, and I've seen far too many guys come down like that. So that's a no-no, I'd say.
It is so idiosyncratic to cycling that you can get so close to these athletes, the top of the sport as a fan. And it is, as a fan, great to watch, isn't it? On those mountain climbs, seeing the ranks of fans close to the cyclists.
There's nothing else like it, OJ. The only comparison I can think of, so football these days, particularly in the new stadiums, the players are a significant distance from the fans. You know, even if you're in an old-fashioned stadium, it's the fullback or it's the winger that the crowd might be up against. Rugby, you're miles away. Cricket, you're more than arm's length. The only equivalent I've experienced is at a Ryder Cup. When you go from green to the next tee box, you go through a little temporary roped-off corridor, and the players will walk through, their caddies will walk behind them, and then the lucky few journalists can walk behind that. And then all the spectators are leaning, particularly in America, the spectators are leaning over the ropes, shouting, swearing. You can smell the cigars in there, you can smell the booze then. That's the only equivalent I can think of where spectators can get literally within touching distance of their sporting heroes.
Well, Chris Froome, I don't know, has he been unlucky or not? I mean, we've had some quite high-profile things that have happened to him, including on Mont Ventoux last year, where he and Richie Porte and Bauke Mollema all crashed into the police motorbike and he had to run up the hill. I mean, I was there that day. I was halfway up at Chalet Reynard. I had no idea what was going on, my French being terrible and not being able to get a phone signal. Has he been unlucky, do you think? Has he been unfairly singled out by fans?
I don't think anyone wants urine thrown at them any time of day, do they, in their working environment? I think the miracle is when you see how close people can get there and you see how much is drunk, the miracle is that more things don't happen. You know, and that the crowd always does part. I think it's remarkable.
Yeah, I agree. It astonishes me that you can get that close to the athletes, you become part of the action. And yeah, I mean, Eddie Merckx was punched in 1974, 1975. So there have been events and they do go back, but it's astonishing actually how well behaved most people are and how few things do go wrong.
Considering how many fans are on the road and how many miles they're travelling, and even at the Ryder Cup, you'll have stewards, you'll have security people. The Tour de France, there's security people there, but they can't marshal all of those roads, can they?
There's still a rope at the Ryder Cup. I was there with when Rory McIlroy was getting a lot of stick from the fans in Minnesota last September. A lot of abuse, a lot of chat about his previous relationships, and he was getting riled. Now, he used it in the right way, but for those riders, there's no escaping it. If you're in the Ryder Cup, it's maybe a 10-second walk from green to tee. When you're on the tee, The arm goes up the marshal, quiet please, has to be complete silence. It's the antithesis of that on Ventoux or Alpe d'Huez. You go through Dutch corner. It's like standing in front of a speaker in a nightclub. The noise is just, there's so much of it that it just distorts in your ears. There's no escaping it.
Well, and also, if you've upset that certain section of fans, I mean, if we talk about the Giro this year, a certain Colombian rider might have upset some Dutch fans. If they've gone up Alpe d'Huez this year, past Dutch corner, there'd be uproar, wouldn't there, if Quintana went past?
Oh, Dutch corner on Alpe d'Huez is just mayhem. It's like Tom says, except it's worse. But it doesn't. There seems to be almost like a self-regulation. I think every so often you see fans being tackled by other fans. At the minute, the whole thing does seem imbalanced. But it's not impossible to imagine the whole atmosphere changing, and on a very, very charged. I mean, one of the things that Team Sky are not popular in France at the minute. Chris Froome's kind of saving grace is that he personally is quite popular because he's polite. He respects the race. The French are quite respectful of Chris Froome as the kind of man they want to have winning their race. They don't like his team. Somebody like Bradley Wiggins was probably a bit less popular in France.
I think Sky were less popular or are less popular when they're winning as well. So when they had their very difficult year, 2014, the reaction they got on the roads was almost quite sympathetic from some of the French fans.
Does it ever happen that the cyclists bite back? I remember seeing, I don't remember the race, but I remember...
Froome's elbowed someone.
Contador certainly hit somebody, yeah. Oh, it's in particular, what cyclists really hate is people running alongside them because, unlike the Ryder Cup, you're going through this, even a climb, you're doing 15, 20 kilometres an hour. You're not face to face with the same drunken idiot for 20 minutes. But what they really hate is people running alongside them and people trying to run and take a selfie or run looking over their shoulder. They can't run in straight lines. So they'll start to push riders across the road. And that's the point where it can get a bit fractious.
But realistically, probably in their heart of hearts, them all being bike racing fans anyway, they probably do enjoy it.
So when you do what you do, you want people to care about it, don't you? And if the mountain stages are where races are won and lost, you want people to care and you want to see passion from the fans. Now, there's obviously a line that you don't want to be crossed, but at the same time, they are the reflection of what you're doing. You're doing bike racing because you love it. These people are watching you do bike racing because they love it too. How
many people were on Mont Ventoux last year? I saw it was 1 million, wasn't it, or something like that? It was a fabulous
they
number.
Always produce some wild.
Was it 1 billion people?
I remember one year I figured out the estimate would have been 8 people deep the whole way up. I never pay any attention to that. It's like estimating the numbers of people at a riot.
It is going to be amazing to see the climbs again this year. Whatever the cyclists think, it is great seeing those crowds.
Bespoke, the Tour de France podcast from BBC 5 Live.
Welcome back to Chris Froome, the secret world of climbing on 5 Live Sport. And ahead of this year's Tour de France, which starts on Saturday, Chris has been giving us an insight into what it takes to be a Grand Tour winner. Chris spoke to BBC Sport's Tom Fordyce, and he's with me in the studio alongside former time trial specialist, author and journalist Dr. Michael Hutchinson. So shortly we'll be taking you through the hardest yards of all, the summit finish. But first, the great Eddie Merckx once said that the race is won by the rider who can suffer the most. So, does Froome agree?
To an extent. I mean, Cav can suffer all he wants on a mountaintop finish, but he's not going to win it. So suffering, I mean, yeah, of course it's a prerequisite when you're going that hard in the mountains, but I'm not sure I'd agree with that comment 100% because I think so much of it is about the preparation beforehand and just how ready you are for that challenge itself.
So what hurts first?
It depends. I mean, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be your legs. I mean, they're doing all the work.
And what does that pain feel like? Does it creep up on you slowly, or is there a point where it just bang, it becomes too much?
It does creep up on you. It starts setting in. You start feeling things a little bit more. I mean, when you're excited at the bottom of a climb, once you start climbing, everything feels good and fresh, and you're able to just respond quickly to small accelerations. You can close the gap to the wheel in front of you. But as the climb goes on, you start feeling a little bit more in your legs. You start feeling, it doesn't quite feel quite so fresh anymore. And slowly, one muscle group will start to almost turn to cement and start getting blocked up because it's basically in overdrive. And then other muscles start compensating for it, and those ones will start shutting down. And it's just muscle by muscle starts getting worse and worse as the pain sets in, and then I guess you start rocking a bit more on your bike sometimes, and then your lower back, you start feeling it in the back and your shoulders somewhere else. So it's something that creeps up on you.
How does the pain of climbing compare to the pain of going flat out in a time trial or going flat out in a bunch sprint? Same sorts of pain or different sorts of pain?
I'd say in the bunch sprint it's different because it's a much more explosive short period. You don't really have time to think about the pain as you do in a time trial, where you've got no one to talk to. It's just you out there on the road, and it's all about your body and just the feelings. And if those feelings are not good, it's one of the hardest things to be able to push yourself that hard when your body's sending you all those signals saying this hurts, slow down, and you just have to go faster. It's one of the toughest mental things out there I imagine you can do to yourself, is to put yourself in a time trial.
You've got two brothers, they're both accountants. How come you can push yourself through so much pain?
I'm pretty sure they could push themselves through the
nasty
pain,
spreadsheet
through through the pain too. But I think they've certainly taken a different route to me.
Could you always do it? Did you always have that ability as a kid?
I always enjoyed that. I always embraced that pain when I was a kid. I think I did a lot of cross country at school, like cross country running, long distance running, and I always loved that feeling of the body just being on the limit and feeling empty, feeling like you're on that sort of cusp of you've got no more to give, but you're still running, you're still pushing your body. And I think that's something even to today that you still enjoy that feeling in a sick kind of way.
I remember you telling me once about an incident that happened on Christmas Day when you were 16 involving a harpoon, which always made me think that, yeah, you could suffer. Tell us about that.
I was anticipating a big lunch at Christmas and went out for a morning run out along the beach. This is in quite a rural part of Kenya, and the tip of a harpoon arrow had just been lodged in the sand, and as I was running I sort of kicked my foot onto the harpoon, and which sort of lodged itself a few inches into my foot, and it had a barb on it as well, so I couldn't just pull it out, and I was stuck on the beach basically. And eventually a Rastafarian came along and basically helped me to get to the nearest local clinic, which was quite a walk away from there. And the doctor on duty basically just took a razor blade and had to cut this thing out of my foot and slice my foot open, and without any anaesthetic or anything. And that was quite an experience.
I don't think most 16-year-olds could cope with that.
I think, yeah, it was definitely made for a memorable Christmas, that's for sure.
So let's get back on the bike on a climb. All club riders will be familiar with the sensation of reaching for the gear, waiting for it to click, and then realising there's nothing more. There's nothing more to find. Do you ever have that?
Yeah. Trust me, it's not just the club riders. There are definitely times that you'll go and click that shifter and think, oh, it's going to get easier. And nothing happens. It's just, there's no worse feeling when you just need that one more gear.
And what do you do mentally then to get over that? Because as you say, there's a physical limit you're at. How do you cope with that feeling?
I think a lot of it goes back again to what I was saying earlier about the preparation. That if you can really tell yourself, listen, I've done everything to be ready for this. You do just get on with it, and you say to yourself, listen, I'm ready, I've done everything, there's nothing more here to do. Just pedal, man. I mean, it's funny, I speak to my brother some days when I'm at the tour, and I tell him the sort of intricates of this tactic or that rider, this is happening on the road, and he just simplifies it so easily for me and just says, what are you talking about, man? Just pedal. It's not so hard. Just pedal, man. And I often think about that when I'm riding. I just think about that and think, at the end of the day, that's all I need to do is just pedal.
So there you go. Next time you're riding up a hill, listen to the words of Chris Froome's brother, just pedal. If only it was that easy. Hutch, is it that easy? Is it just pedal? Is it that easy?
Yeah, it is. The difficult bit is getting ready to just pedal. But one of the things I love when people talk about this sort of suffering is the way that you can be so rational in the midst of all these clouds of pain across your vision, and things, you start to smell odd things because your brain is beginning to slowly fry. But you can still think, well, so-and-so's 10 seconds up the road and I've got this many watts and I weigh this. And this is what someone like Chris Froome does. It's all rational. They're in the midst of all this and they could think all the details that the race is composed of.
And Tom, if we're talking about suffering, that glorious suffering, it is an integral part of bike racing, isn't it? And watching bike racing.
It should be slightly ghoulish, shouldn't it, OJ? The fact that we're watching these men tear themselves apart. But it's this one of these wonderful things about cycling. Again, you don't get with many other sports. We could never do what someone like Chris Froome or Quintana or Contador can do on hills. But in a strange way, all club riders feel like they can relate to them. Partly because you can go and ride those same hills in a way that you can't go and play cricket at Lords or run out and play rugby at Twickenham. You can take your bike and you can do it for free. Just stick your bike in the car, go down to the south of France, and you can ride these same hills. But also because we've all ridden up hills and we've all had a horrible time riding up hills, and we've all had that moment that I referred to there when you reach for an extra gear and nothing there, or the point of no return when you think, I'm really struggling on this hill, and you look up and you can't see the top of it.
When you start weaving from side to side to try and find the easier way up that gradient. And there is a sense of turning yourself inside out, which is a very horrible phrase, but I think if you have ridden up a hill, you will have done that at some point. The professional riders, they do that themselves, don't they? They are still on that suffering scale like we are riding up hills.
I think riding up a hill is almost the same for everybody. The difference in the pros is that they do it faster. That's what it boils down to. That's why we feel we can live with them, we can experience what they do, is because we can go and suffer exactly the same way. I was at the top of Mont Ventoux a couple of years ago when Chris Froome won the first stage. He won there, and Dan Martin was in the top 4 or 5 in that stage, and he crossed the line and collapsed more or less at my feet. And it was almost a traumatic experience for me because he was so drained. He was grey and hollow-eyed and clearly had been through hell. And it was such a dramatic image. It's something that I always think of when I think of these guys riding up hills, is just how deep they're going.
The thing is, as a fan watching that, if we were playing top trumps, Dan Martin's bravery rating would have gone up about 5 points. And we enjoy watching these riders suffer.
I think we like to think, OJ, that we can, when sports people are at their limits, or at their physical limits, that we get a better look into their characters, that you can see someone's soul. Now, that might be a conceit. Maybe we're just seeing someone hit their physical limits. But we like to think that you're exposed in that position, that you can't hide because you are in such discomfort, that there is no point no way at that point that you can put on airs and graces. It's so dramatic. You feel like you are truly seeing into someone's character.
Does it come down to a mental battle, Hutch? Does it? Because obviously you can be physically great. Is there a limit that you can push your body to, or can you go beyond that?
I think the mental element and the suffering is the cherry on the top of the cake. The cake is, we keep talking about the physical preparation. You have to go into these things right. If you get a summit finish, a lot of a summit finish is riding to the bottom of the mountain while conserving energy. And that, nobody puts that on TV because that's not exciting, but that's sitting in the middle of the bunch, staying safe, not crashing, making sure you keep eating, making sure you keep drinking so that you're delivered to, say, the Izard in the best possible condition. Once you've got, you've done the training, you've trained from December through to July, you've got to the bottom of the mountain. Well, then at that point, it's mental, it's physical, it's how you harness those two, and you suffer better than everybody else. But it really is just the last 3 or 4%, but it's the 3 or 4% that is so captivating on television.
Can you push yourself beyond that limit, though? You've got, maybe it's a stupid question, but you've got that limit. Can you go beyond it if you're mentally strong enough?
You can get yourself to your limit. Your limit is your limit. You can't think yourself a better athlete. You've got what you've got.
Oh. So why can some people handle pain better than others, do you think? Because this comes down to pain, doesn't it? Suffering and pain, they are linked.
I think some of it is an understanding that you're not on your own in that moment. When you're feeling dreadful, is reminding yourself that everyone around you is also at their physical limits. So they're also suffering. I think that helps riders, or endurance runners, the same way. You're not on your own at that point. I think the other thing that makes a big difference is whether you're succeeding or not. You can be going through the same pain. If you're dropping off your rival's wheel, then suddenly your whole world comes crashing down. If you glance back under your right armpit and you see him grimacing and him losing your wheel, then the great saviour of endorphins come into play, and suddenly it all feels worth it, and you can feel the pain is still there, but it's pain for a purpose.
Are we back to mind games then? Are we back to the mental side of things? Are we back to that trying to crack your opponent?
It's that balance between what you can do safely, which will put him in trouble. It's why some of the kind of the classic climbers, the traditional climbers, like Dan Martin is a good example. Someone who can change pace, who can accelerate, who can sit down, who can take a couple of quick pedal strokes and just keep you always on edge and never quite comfortable. I mean, that's not the fastest way to get up a hill, but it's a great way to make sure your rivals are even worse than you are. I mean, that's effectively, that's climbing badly to make everybody else climb worse. And one of the things that has changed in the last couple of decades in cycling, particularly with power meters and that kind of scientific approach, is that riders like Chris Froome are much less likely to try and follow a rider like Dan Martin when he does that. They'll probably let Dan Martin go up the road and peg him back slowly. It's one of the tactics that's changed. And it changed the way someone like Chris Froome climbs, because he's climbing as a GC contender, not as a stage winner. And these things are all quite subtle, but they're distinctions that someone like Chris Froome understands entirely in depth.
But that takes supreme confidence, doesn't it? If somebody rides away from you, to know that you'll maybe catch them up later on because you're riding up the hill better than they are.
It's experience, isn't it? It's experience. It's having recce'd that climb. It's knowing what you can push yourself to. It's knowing where their limits are.
It's also once or twice having gone after them when you shouldn't have, and discovering that it's even worse that way.
And Froome has done that, hasn't he? Froome had certainly, in the old days, Froome would try and chase down everything, or he would just enjoy the thrill of the chase. And he would. So you've got a finite number of matches to burn, haven't you? He would burn too many matches too early. What he's got a lot better at, I think, is conserving those matches for the point where he really needs to start a fire.
And it's the ability to sit in a climb saying, well, okay, Richie Port's going up the road. We've got 2 kilometres to go. He's taken 4 seconds out of me in a kilometre, another to 12 seconds. I'm 45 seconds ahead on GC. Let's just let him go. And it's being able, as to think that through while everything is burning and everything is on fire.
So if we're talking about all these pros, these professional bike riders, and the way they climb up hills is the wrong way, it's the bad way to do a climb because they're in a race and they're trying to crack their opponents. Hutch, coach me through the best way to take on a climb. How do I do it? Is it pace? Is it nutrition? Should I take on a gel at the bottom?
It's making sure you get to the bottom fresh. So if that involved getting out of the car, that's one thing. If that involved riding 100 kilometres across France, that's a different thing. But it's making sure you're fueled, you're hydrated, you're ready, you're in a nice calm position. And it's making sure that you pace it nice and evenly. If you just want to get up the Ventoux or Alpe d'Huez as fast as you can, it's essentially a time trial. It's not a power to aerodynamic drag time trial. It's a power to weight time trial. So it's riding a nice even pace until maybe the last couple of kilometres when you can push on like a flat time trial. But it's doing that whilst being light. I mean, that's essentially the key to it. If you wanted to set your best possible time up to as you do all that, but you get to the bottom light.
I shall make that note in my mind next time I try and get up the Ventoux as quickly as I can. And also, mental note, don't go barefoot running and stand on a harpoon tip, because that sounded so painful. Now, you are listening to Chris Froome, The Secret World of Climbing. We've heard about the preparation, we've heard about the tactics and the dangers of riding in the mountains, but what about when Chris finds himself in a breakaway with 2 or 3 of his biggest rivals? How does he go about playing the ultimate game of poker on wheels?
I think it certainly can be a game of poker once we get to the real sort of racing end of the bike race, because especially when you're, say, 10Ks out, you don't want to be the guy on the front doing all the pulling if you've got 2 or 3 rivals just sitting on your wheel. So you almost need to play the game of, well, I'm giving everything I've got here. I can only do a 30-second pull, then it's up to you guys.
And you're pretending at that point.
And you're pretending because you know that in the last 1 or 2 kilometers, you're going to have to give absolutely everything there is to try and distance yourself from these guys and gain time on them. So you don't want to be overly eager when it's still 10Ks to go, for example. So at that point, you maybe being a bit cagey, or even bluffing that you're hanging off the wheel. You leave a few meters gap, let the guys think that maybe he's not on a good day today, and maybe now's the time to push, and they end up going too deep or doing a lot of work at that point, thinking that they might drop you. So it is a bit of a poker game out there, and I think sometimes it's gone in my favor and sometimes it's gone against me. I've been the one who's been fooled, and it's just this constant game of between you and the other GC guys of just exactly where you're at and how you can play on each other's insecurities.
Can you read your rivals now, do you think?
I don't try and read them a lot. I think 9 times out of 10 I'm just focusing on my own effort. But there are a couple guys who, Alberto Contador, for example, if you can catch it, he's got this little grimace he gives that almost looks like a smile, but it's a grimace of pain when he's really on the limit. And it's only for a split second. He only does it for just an instant. It's just as he's sort of taking a breath, and you can see, he's there. He's at that sort of threshold. But it's very hard to pick up on that, and unless you're really watching him, you're going to miss it. I see it all the time when I watch a race back on TV, and I watch it, and you can see the camera from the front, and I can pick up on stuff a lot easier there. It's a lot harder when you're on the road and the guy's sitting behind you, or he's 2 wheels ahead of you, and you can't see what their face looks like. What's
your little tell?
I'd probably say dropping my head, but I ride with my head dropped most of the time, so I think my own teammates and my own wife can't really tell if I'm on a good day or not. I think it's just my style of riding. It's a bit unpredictable.
Is it a cruel place at that point? Because it's fundamentally man against man, isn't it? And you're all feeling awful, you're all feeling quite exposed, and you all want to make the other man suffer.
It is. It's a really strange place to be in, because you're all suffering. There's no one who's easy going up those climbs, but it depends on the degree of suffering and how much everyone's willing to suffer. If you're suffering, but you can see someone else is definitely suffering more than you, you'll probably go and even push it even harder, which just sounds mental, but that's going to be the difference between being in front or being behind. That's what it comes down to.
You want to twist the knife, don't you?
You do. If you can see someone's battling and they're a threat to your position, you're going to twist that knife as hard as you can.
And you almost feel like you're breaking someone's character in that moment as well, don't you?
You can see it. It's like a switch that's been flicked. When someone pops that switch and just basically mentally in their head, you can see it's a case of, this is just too much. I cannot carry on at this speed, and it's a switch that you just flick, and you can see it. You can see it on people. In effect, it's a broken character, and it's a loss of morale. That, okay, I'm giving up here. I'm conceding time. It's a hugely mental game. As much as it is physical, it's mental.
What does it feel like to have that sort of victory over someone in that small moment? It's quite primeval, isn't it, really?
It is. It's rewarding. It really does. It's a great feeling when you can inflict that to someone else, and a horrible feeling when someone's doing it to you.
If there's somebody I never want to play poker against, it's Chris Froome and possibly Nairo Quintana, because on different ends of the scale, you never really know what they're thinking. So on that tip, Hutch, is Froome the best poker player in the peloton? Listening to him there.
I love the fact that Chris Froome's poker face is a mask of constant suffering. You never know when he's really suffering, because he looks like he's dying every moment he's on a bicycle. He has been pretty good over the last few years. I think genuinely, I make jokes about it, but I think that is part of it, is because he really doesn't have a tell. And I think he's played the game pretty well.
If we're talking about tells, which you asked Chris there in your interview, Tom, it very much is like poker. The tell is that giveaway sign that you're bluffing, isn't it, in poker? That's what the tell is. It gives it away. If he's talking about that, Alberto Contador gives that when he takes a breath, that little grimace, and then that's the point to twist the knife, in his words. That is poker.
And what I find extraordinary, I love that bit, OJ, when I was talking to him about that. The thing I found extraordinary is it's brilliant in theory, and then you think, okay, he's also able to rationalise that when he is at his absolute limit. When most of us wouldn't be able to think straight. Most of us would just be thinking, how long have I got to the top? He's able to make those sort of calculations, and you got the sense as well that he relishes those calculations. And the best cyclists, I think, do. I remember talking to Stephen Roach, who obviously won the Tour in 87, and he absolutely loved looking at his rivals and trying to work out what was going on, not just in their legs, what was going on in their heads. He just took great pleasure in being at the heart of that soap opera.
There are a handful of ex-pros who are tremendous analysts, tremendous pundits on television or on radio. And one of the things that I enjoy about listening to doing that is knowing that in the midst of the race, in the midst of the mayhem, that is all they were doing. They were just seeing the same things, seeing the same patterns. And when you talk to these guys, I mean, I spoke to Steve Cummings a couple of weeks ago, who's a master tactician. And he said, oh, no, it's very, very simple. I mean, you know everyone there, so you know who's friends with so-and-so, who's trying to get a contract with his team, the kind of person who's not going to chase, the kind of person who chases everything. And you look at the break and you sort of see the dynamic of how all of that's going to work out. And think, oh, well, there we are. It's perfectly straightforward, Steve. And this is analysing, maybe 20 guys' personalities and the personalities of their team managers and the personalities of their team leaders and seeing how that is going to mesh together into a break that is going to stay away or a break that is not. It is phenomenal.
So being a pro bike rider in these situations, you become an expert on human behaviour.
It's psychology, it's physiology, it's physics. There's so much that these guys have to think about. And some of them do it slowly and deliberately and can explain what they're doing. These are the guys who become great TV commentators because they can explain it. There are other guys who just do it on instinct. They just look at a group going up the road and say, oh yeah, that's the group to go with. And they couldn't tell you why. They just know.
Give me examples. Give me named examples. Who are the people who do it on instinct, do you think?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Tommy Vogler, I think, probably does it largely on instinct. It would be a more French or a more Italian style of doing it. I think the analytical style is more kind of Anglophone. The Australians and the Americans are very good at that. But riders like I say, Tommy Vogler, maybe way back when someone like Richard Virenque probably functioned much more on instinct. And it's possibly a more continental way of doing it.
And you were talking about Stephen Roach there. He enjoying looking at his rivals and seeing who was going to crack and trying to work it out. Is that a level of sadism, do you think? Wanting to punish your rivals to make them crack?
I think we heard sadism from Froome there, didn't we? The phrase twisting the knife. You want to see another man suffer. I think it's also politics. These guys would make fantastic politicians because you're constantly making little alliances. Maybe it's a temporary one. Maybe it's a promise of something in the future. Right, you help me out here. I'm going to do this for you in 3 weeks' time. You give me your gel now. I'll sort you out another time. One of my teammates will sort you out. Constant alliances. Constant rethinking of where you are, what you could do for that guy. Do you want to come and take a pull? You don't. Right, how can I make you come and take a pull and help me out?
If it came to it, I'd vote Cummins if he stands for Parliament. So Froome will have his team radio in his ear telling him what's going on. Can you always rely on it in those moments, do you think? Can you rely on that radio of what's being told to you by the car?
You can rely on it, assuming it works. Sometimes they don't work so well in the mountains. You can rely on what you're getting, but you can't call the tactics from the car. Chris Froome, it has been in some ways perhaps criticism of Chris Froome that he quite often does when the chips are down. He wants advice. There was I can't remember which year it was, there was a crosswind stage a couple of years ago where the thing started to break up and the two riders at the front of the back of the group where the snap happened, there was Cavendish and Chris Froome. And Chris Froome got on the radio to ask what to do. And Cavendish attacked an absolutely full-blooded sprint to get across to the front group as it was going, and then subsequently won the stage. But the point where he won the stage was the point where he made the jump to the front half of the peloton as it broke. And that was exactly the point where Chris Froome just wasn't too sure. And that then resulted in Sky had to chase for kilometres after that to try and bring the thing back together. And that's the kind of tactical judgment that is an absolute snap. You have to know how to do it. I think Chris has got better at that over the last couple of years. That's not a mistake he would make now, I don't think. But you can't depend on a guy in the team car to call the tactics.
And what you're probably seeing there as well is the difference between those two respective riders' backgrounds. So for Cavendish, it is instinctive, isn't it? Because he has raced for so many years. Froome came from a completely different background. He was riding a mountain bike up dirt roads in Kenya at the Ngong Hills. He wasn't doing races at the age of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. He wasn't going through training camps. He wasn't part of a normal cycling club. You know, Simbaz Safari, the team that he rode in with his friend David Kinja, were just a disparate group of mates who liked doing long rides.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Nature versus nurture in Lycra.
Bespoke, the Tour de France podcast from BBC 5 Live.
Let's get to the business end of a mountain finish, where the stage is won and the stage is also lost.
Approaching a summit. Do you ever doubt yourself in those dark moments? Do you ever find yourself thinking, why didn't I take up table tennis or something else?
I certainly haven't had any fantasies about table tennis, but Yeah, I mean, there are times you do doubt yourself, and you think you're on a good day, but someone just accelerates that little bit too fast out of a corner, and you just think, "Oof, he's looking fresher than I'm feeling right now." So, I mean, yeah, there are times you doubt yourself, and it's so much of the time it's a game of confidence. It's a game of how much you believe in what you're able to do compared to the guy next to you, and just trying to always judge that balance of who can go faster, and therefore should I be upping the pace or should I be hanging off a little bit, trying to get them to slow down.
When your lungs feel like they're on fire and you're tearing all those muscle fibres in your legs, is it in some ways a very pure moment for you? It's just you doing what you do best. It's almost a very honest moment, I guess.
It is, and especially in a race like Tour de France, when you get up into the mountains, there's no better way to tell if you've done your homework or not. There's no hiding. When you get into those really high mountains, if you haven't done the work, it's going to show. There's nowhere to hide. You can't sit in a bunch. You can't rely on your teammates to protect you and shield you at that point. It's man against man, and if you haven't got it, you haven't got it.
Do you love it?
I do love it. I love that excitement. I love that anticipation. It's a lot of hard work and sacrifice that goes into being ready for a big mountain day in something like the Tour de France. And it's just when it all comes together, there's no better feeling. It just feels it's so rewarding, and that's what brings me back every year to the Tour and makes that my number one priority of the season, is just how rewarding it is to have that feeling of being able to inflict that onto your rivals and being able to feel as if you're ahead of them in that sense.
What are you thinking of at that point? There was a famous incident in 2007 when Paula Radcliffe was running the New York Marathon, and in the final half mile she was in a neck-and-neck sprint with her arch rival Getawami, and at that point her legs feel toast, she's exhausted, and the thing that got her through it was repeating to herself, "I love you, Isla, I love you, Isla," Isla being her new daughter. That got her through it.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that go through your mind in those kind of moments, and you think about your loved ones at home, you think about all kinds of different things. You think about your rivals, how much you've anticipated this moment of racing against them, and visualized how you think it's going to pan out. And for me, I mean, I do think about my family a lot when I race, and think that I'm laying it all on the line for them.
Are you thinking about your mum and all the encouragement she gave you? Are you thinking about your wife Michelle or your son Kellen?
I mean, it changes depending on what kind of mood I'm in. But yeah, there are all kinds of things go through your mind at that point.
So when you win a mountain stage, how long until you can enjoy it? Is there an ecstatic release of emotion as you cross the line?
There is. I think there's already a release of really good, positive feelings and energy once you manage to drop your rivals. That for me is one of the best feelings ever. And then of course when you get close to that finish line and the suffering can finally end, you can finally switch off and let the body recover. It's just a huge feeling of just release and relaxation, I guess, from the effort you've just buried yourself to do.
Does the outcome make all the difference? In other words, if you've expended the same energy, hit the same wattage, and you come third, is the emotion completely different and the feeling in your body completely different?
Yeah, I'd say it is, definitely. I mean, there's just this extra feeling of sort of endorphins if it's the victory you're coming away with, compared to if it's a result you'd be more disappointed with. It's a very different kind of feeling. You get off and you start thinking already about what went wrong, whereas when you win, it's just there's no better feeling.
How long until you can eat? Because your body obviously needs it, but there must be all that adrenaline, endorphin racing around you as well.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things, especially being in the yellow jersey at the Tour de France. It can get really hard because you finish a stage and you've got to try and get changed as fast as possible to go and do media and podium protocol and all that kind of stuff. And it's half the time I've got a bowl of rice next to me while I'm trying to get dressed at the same time, and you're just shoving what you can into your mouth just to start that recovery process.
When does the adrenaline wear off and the exhaustion kick in?
I think once finally, sometimes it's only sort of later at night, once you get back to the hotel, sometimes 9-10 o'clock at night, and then you get onto your bed for the first time. That's where finally, when you switch off from everything, that's when you start feeling the compound effect of 3 weeks of racing, and you start feeling just how tough a Grand Tour is.
Are the bad days the ones where you have your shower sitting down?
Yeah, definitely. For me, that's a measure of just how hard the day has been. And sometimes if you get in the shower and you literally feel as if you don't have the energy to stand there. So for me, I just sit down on the floor and start soaping myself up and cleaning myself while I'm just sitting down. It feels like a break, giving my legs a break.
So you're on the podium, you've got your flowers in your jersey, you fast forward an hour, and then you're sitting naked on the floor of your bathroom. It doesn't sound just physically demanding, it sounds emotionally draining as well.
It's an incredible image, isn't it? And it just shows you how deep these riders go, how total the exhaustion is, that even doing something as simple as just standing there and washing yourself in the shower, you're so tired, you sit on the floor. You hear stories about riders who are extremely hungry because they've just done a 180-kilometre stage. And once they've had their massage from the Swanee and they go back to their room, they find it almost impossible to peel themselves off the bed. They know they've got to eat, they want to eat, but the idea of just walking 10 or so paces to the lift, getting the lift down to the team room and eating seems too much effort. You'll hear stories about riders who they want to speak to their wives or their girlfriends back at home, and they find it really hard even conversing. They're so tired. They will listen. They'll make fantastic listeners.
Do some grunting.
They just grunt every 10 minutes, but it's that level of exhaustion.
And then not only do they do that, they then have to get up the next day and do it all again.
That's the thing that is extraordinary. I mean, I when I was racing, I did sort of a few week-long stage races, and you felt like every hour of every day it was getting up, it was putting on your cycling kit, it was getting on your bike, it was doing the stage, and doing that for 3 weeks, and these big long stages. Particularly this year's tour, there were a lot of long stages that are going to take kind of 5 hours plus. So you're on your bike for this period. I mean, and the amount of food you have to eat, and here's 5 hours when you're on your bike when eating is actually quite difficult. You can kind of try and keep up with carbohydrate coming in, but it cuts down the amount of time you have left to eat the rest of the stuff in the rest of the day. And it's how you do that day after day. You get up, you face it again, even if it's not. For Chris Froome, there are major appointment stages, and then there are stages where he just has to get from one end to the other without crashing. But that's still demanding and nerve-wracking, intense. Even when it's not a race you've got to win, you've got to stay safe, and that's mentally draining.
So if you're trying to keep your body intact, because there's a level of physical degradation that's going to happen over a 3-week tour, it just starts to fall apart. When you're going up with these climbs, should Chris Froome be eating? Will he eat? Can you eat on the climbs?
You have to. I mean, if it's the last few kilometres, well, yeah, probably you don't at that point. But you've got to keep fuel and you've got to keep liquid coming in all day, because you can only eat, I think, maybe about 70 grams of carbohydrate an hour. You can't put in 140 grams the next hour if you didn't eat during the first hour. So as soon as you start in the morning, you're eating and drinking constantly, carefully, the whole way through the stage to the end. Because for a start, you need fuel for that stage. But the bigger your deficit, the bigger a hole you've dug that you've got to try and get out of before the next day's stage starts. I mean, somebody said that endurance pro cycling is a duathlon of cycling and eating. It's about eating almost as much as it's about cycling.
Oh, they should get me in Team Sky. I can show them how to eat more than 70 grams of carbohydrates an hour. And it is about that degradation. When you get to that third week, that final week, I mean, they are literally falling apart, the riders, aren't they? It's how they manage that.
It's one of those strange things, isn't it? It's at that point, it's no longer the person who's going the fastest, but the person who's going the least slow. They're all feeling awful. They're all feeling exhausted. That's where your training comes in. That's what they'll do those repeated climbs on Mount Tidy to do, to put those miles in their legs. And then, of course, because you're not doing it on your own, you have a team around you. And that is something we haven't touched on so much. The fact that you will have riders to do that legwork for you, to take you to that point on the climb where you can do what you want to do, where you're going to break away. It's that sense that you're not doing it on your own, and that there is always, hopefully, if you have the right team around you, and that team of riders are in good shape, that they can drag you towards Paris.
So what do you think the feelings of the climbers will be? Because the last climb is Col de Izoard, which is a big old climb. What do you think people like Chris Froome and Quintana, the climbers, will be feeling when they get over that line, when they know for them, realistically, the Tour de France is finished?
Well, it's not really, because there's a time trial 2 days later, which, if it's close, the time trial will be critical. If someone like Chris Froome reaches the line of the Izoard with 2 or 3 minutes in hand over everybody else, well, at that point, yeah, he knows he's won it. And at that point, yes, there is a release. I think in the Tour, that's tempered by the fact you've got to get through another 3 stages. But I think those 3 stages, if you've got that kind of margin, if you know you're going to win it, those 3 stages must have a certain glory about them, a certain kind of parading around France, celebrating your good fortune and your victory. And that actually must be quite nice.
Now, what goes up generally has to come back down again, but watching Chris Froome descend hasn't always been the easiest thing to watch. Now, early on in his career, and somebody tweeted about this the other day, said that you knew early on in Chris Froome's career, when he was descending, you stayed away from him.
It was Dan Lloyd, yeah.
It was Dan Lloyd who tweeted that, yeah. Not so much nowadays.
He's still slightly scary to watch, and his teammates will admit that, that he will take risks. Certainly in training, he will take risks that they wouldn't take. Let's say they're doing an easy ride 10 days a week out from a big stage race, and the director sportif has said to them, lads, just take it easy on this descent. It's not unheard of for Froome to go herring down and start undertaking cars on the inside of bends, and the team radio will be going crazy. What are you doing? What are you doing? He enjoys it. Geraint Thomas says that you'll watch him go into corners sometimes thinking, what line are you riding there? Why are you taking that speed through that line? And yet he'll stay upright. It's incredible.
Is that his mountain biking background?
It could mean mountain bikers are good at this because they're used to racing on loose surfaces and gravel, so they do actually have a very nice feel for when things are going to slip. I'm not with Chris Froome. I'm sometimes not convinced that what we're dealing with is genius. I think it's commitment, which
definitely commit. I think that when he grew up riding, OJ, the descents that he was doing in the Rift Valley were pretty much long and straight. They weren't hairpins. They weren't multiple bends. So when he first came over to Europe to race, it was a huge shock for him. He hadn't had to learn how to descend properly. He hadn't had to learn where to put your weight, where to brake, where not to brake. He was used to sort of trundling down quite nicely on these big long roads. And his mountain biking, he was on a mountain bike, but he wasn't, say, like Cadell Evans or Floyd Landis. He wasn't used to going down great big drop-offs or, going through rock gardens and stuff like this. He was on a mountain bike because that was the most appropriate bike for these dirt roads. But he wasn't getting that super technical background that a pure mountain biker would get.
So how much now is descending part of being a good climber?
It's becoming more and more part of it. I mean, this year's Tour, actually, they've only got 3 summit finishes in this year's Tour, so descending is actually going to be critical. I mean, we saw Chris Froome attacked on a descent last year in the Pyrenees and opened up a gap to the astonishment of everyone, because you just don't expect Chris Froome to not attack on a descent. This is not how bike racing works. It's becoming, it's going to be important this year, because there are a couple of very long, fast descents. There's a Mont du Chat, which we saw in the Dauphiné the other week, which is a monstrous climb followed by a monstrous descent. And any gain you manage to get on the climb, you have to hang on to down the descent. So there's no point in being able to climb the Mont du Chat 2 minutes faster than, let's say, Richie Porte. If Richie Porte can ride down the far side 2 minutes faster than you, it equals out again. So you have to make that advantage stick. You've got to get down the hill.
So do you think Chris Froome has been working on his descending then? Is that something, you've obviously just talked about him coming down the hill and going fast. Has he worked on it technically to become a better descender?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, he's someone who pays attention to all the small details, and descending is a big, big detail. And it's a strange thing about great climbers often don't make great descenders, partly because they don't have to be great descenders. They're not making up time. It's one of these counterintuitive things that it's often the sprinters who are the best descenders, because they're the ones stuck at the back. They're in the gruppetto. They're the ones desperately trying to make up time they've lost on the climb to get under the cutoff. Someone like Mark Cavendish, fantastic descender. Greipel is a fantastic descender. Kittle's a great descender. Some of the great climbers aren't. I think with Froome, the question for me is whether he's fearless or whether he is not even aware of the risks he's taking. I don't know. I mean, he's someone who has pushed himself, hasn't he, in his career to get to where he's got to from his background. No one else has come from that sort of background, so he's used to taking risks and pushing himself. But I don't know if he always realises quite how squeaky it gets.
I think my feeling is yes, he probably does, because you don't have to fall off more than once or twice before you realise. I mean, and he's someone who definitely learns from experience. I think he's probably quite calmly and rationally decided that this is something that he has to improve. I think that he descended Mont du Chat in the Dauphiné with tremendous flair and a few squeaky moments, as you say. And I think part of that was sending out a message to people saying, look, don't think you're going to take me on the descent of anything. I will be here. And he said, oh, I hadn't seen the descent. And he must have looked at it on a map, or they'd got a very thorough briefing from the car. Because actually, the team radio can help you with a descent. If they're just behind you, they can call it off the sat-nav. But it's something I'm sure he's worked at, because it's something that, was a chink in his armour.
Because you can have descent in the same way. If you can have climbing form, you can have descending form. If you go through a corner and you get it slightly wrong, you might lock up your back wheel or something. Then you're going to be more nervous than the next one. And the peloton can be a very bitchy place. That period in the 2013 Giro where Bradley Wiggins was starting to struggle, the peloton was full of, he's lost his bottle. Really nasty, quite personal stuff. And a lot of it would be behind your back. I think the Aussies come out and say it to your face, mate, everything all right? But everyone else will be chatting behind you. So, your form can come and go on the descents as well.
So if your bottle goes, you could blow your Tour de France. I mean, if Chris Froome went too hot into a corner, has a squeaky moment, as we say, if he can't keep his bottle, then that could ruin his Tour.
Well, it's probably an oversimplification to say that was where Wiggins' 2013 Giro went wrong, but it was a lot of where Wiggins' 2013 Giro went wrong. A wet descent that he just bottled out of. He just didn't have, and I wouldn't want to say that as a criticism, because God knows I'm one of the world's worst descenders. I've crashed on all sorts of entirely innocuous things, but you've got to be able to keep your foot in it, because there's no way you're going to get any patience or any tolerance from the rest of them. They're not going to wait for you because you can't get down the hill quickly.
And as this programme is about Chris Froome, he has over the years seemed to take on what he's needed to win the Tour de France. The year that he needed to climb, he became arguably the best climber in the world. The year he needed to time trial, he became arguably one of the best time trialists in the world. This year that it looks like he needs to descend, do you think he'll become maybe the best descender in the world?
No, I don't think he'll be the best.
He's not heavy enough.
He won't be the best, but he doesn't need to be the best. He just needs to be good enough, doesn't he? He needs, as Michael says, he needs to make sure that those hard-earned seconds that he chisels out on the climb aren't tossed away on the descent. And look, a lot of the GC contenders will have slight issues with the descending. Richie Porte, apparently, will often leave a wheel's width or so, a wheel's length or so behind the guy he's chasing. He just likes a little bit of insurance going to the corners. So he's, if the guy in front breaks a little bit late, he's got a space to go into. Riders who don't know him will be diving in front of him. They'll be trying to nick that space. So a lot of them have these little issues. None of these riders are perfect riders, and that's where the fascination for us comes from.
And just to get excited about this Tour de France, it means that, yes, we don't have summit finishes, but almost what happens after those summits could be as exciting as what's gone before it. Looking forward to it. So when it's all over in terms of competitive cycling, will you still see Froome tackling the odd mountain just for fun?
I think the level of suffering stops. I think you're definitely not going to catch me doing massive threshold efforts for half an hour straight up any mountain, but you'll definitely see me on a bike and still out there tackling climbs and just enjoying riding my bike. I mean, this year alone, I've really enjoyed, especially the days when I don't have intervals and I can just go and do a nice long ride and enjoy the scenery, enjoy the outdoors. I mean, those are all reasons I fell in love with the sport in the first place. And I think even once I retire, I'll still love those same things about cycling.
Well, that word retirement is probably a few years off still for Chris Froome. He's 32 years old now. He's got 3 Tour de France in the bag. He's won 2 on the bounce. How good can he be? How many can he win, Michael?
Well, nobody's ever won more than 5. He probably isn't badly placed to try and push that on, but I think there's a mental toll to these kind of races. I think the reason that we've got 4 riders sitting on 5 Tour de France, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's very, very hard to win more than that, because mentally, to prepare again to do something you've already done 5 times, something you've proved you can do, that's tough.
I mean, obviously, he is a name that's not bandied around in cycling terms anymore, but Lance Armstrong did win more than 5. I mean, obviously, he did it in ways which weren't right, but what was that mental strength that he had there?
I don't know. I mean, he clearly was a very, very hard-headed competitor. His entire career and the way he set about it makes it completely. There was a ruthlessness about it.
Arguably sociopathic, wasn't it?
I suspect, but I wouldn't want to say any of the rest of them are sociopathic. I think anyone who wants to win 5 Tour de France's has got a very, very focused view of life. To be able to do that again and again and again and put yourself through that is very, very tough. And I think it's very easy when you've won 3 to say, oh, I'd like to win 5. I think I think you got to win 4 before you win 5. It's quite tough.
Well, this will be the year that he wins 4 if he wins this year's Tour de France. Can you see him taking the honours in 2017, winning 3 on the bounce?
So, I think it's a very open race this year. He doesn't have much proven form. He may well be in great form, but he hasn't had proven form. He's 4th in the Dauphiné, which he won before his 3 previous Tour wins. I think Michael makes an interesting point in that all sports people, no matter how driven they are at the start or the middle of their careers, they'll all reach a point where, even if it's a subconscious thing, they're satisfied. They've done enough. And they might be thinking, I'm not satisfied, but you can see it. You can see it in golfers. You can see it when they've won enough and they still want to compete and they'll still talk a good game. You can see it in cricketers. When a batsman has scored, 80, 90 centuries and he's just done enough. And you only need to drop off that tiny fraction, a tiny, tiny fraction, and the rest of the field will come past you. So that's the question for Froome. Having seen him last week, he still struck me that he has that desire. But it's been a difficult year at Team Sky. His contract ends at the end of 2018, I think. Will he stay for the extra year? We don't know. There are a lot of external variables for him to deal with as well.
You look at it, though, and you would say this more than anyone because you've sat down with him for an extended period of time. He does seem to have a steeliness. I wouldn't say it was being ruthless, but he seems to have a steeliness which says, I want to show everyone, maybe the doubters, that I can be the best cyclist that has ever been.
There's a wonderful quiet determination to Chris Froome. He's very polite. He's very calm. In the interview, some people might feel the interview's a little bit flat in the way he talks, but part of that is because when Tom asks him a question, he thinks very hard about what's the best answer he can give Tom. What is it that Tom really wants to know? What can he say that's helpful? But he thinks about everything like that. And there's a very quiet core of steel in the middle of Chris Froome that means he sets out to carefully put together his year to work his way towards the Tour de France to win it. It's seeing a big project and seeing it through. And that is, that counts for a lot.
Do you think there's been a level from Team Sky this year, from Chris Froome? He hasn't done many race days. He didn't go well at the Dauphiné. Do you think it's the colour of money? Do you think they're playing a bluff on everyone, going, well, maybe he's not as good as he is, and he comes in better than he has been in previous years?
I don't think so. I think Sky, in some ways, in terms of their strategy, their race strategy, it's all about dominance. Froome is the alpha male in that team. Team Sky like it when they're the alpha men. They're like putting a marker down in the Tour of Oman. They're like winning the Dauphiné. This is what we do. We don't care what you think. We're going to ride this way. We're going to try and control the individual stages. So I don't think it's a sense of that. He's 32 now, and he has now got some miles on the clock. He hasn't had any significant injuries, but these things catch up with you.
Well, it's been fascinating, and it'll be fascinating to watch and listen to the Tour de France when it starts on Saturday. Thank you so much to Tom Fordyce and to Michael Hutchinson. The Grand Boucle, the Tour de France gets underway on Saturday in Dusseldorf. We will be there. We have commentary of the closing stages of every stage, either on 5 Live Sports Extra or the BBC Sport website with Simon Brotherton and Rob Hales. And look out for the podcast, Bespoke at Le Tour. It'll be available every evening on the 5 Live website. And you can see what we get up to on Facebook with a live nightly show.
On digital and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
bbc.co.uk/5live.